students. Today we are going to see the agents of pollinations, which is very important process for the food production of the throughout the world for all the living beings. There is no food without pollinating agents. The agents of pollination. The transfer of pollen from anther to stigma is carried out by various factors are called pollinating agents or pollinators. The pollination is affected by many agents like wind, water, animals, and even plants themselves. Next, mode of pollinations. So there are two modes of pollination. The one is abiotic, which is the pollen carried out by non-living physical factors. Another one, biotic factors, that is the pollen carried by living organisms. In these two cases, the biotic pollination is widely occurred in nature. When we talk about abiotic agents, there are two types. One is anemophily, that is the pollination by wind. Another one is hydrophily, the pollination by water. Next, biotic agents, that is zoophily. Anemophilous pollination by wind. The wind pollinated flowers are called anemophilous or anemophilous flowers. Wind pollinated plants are generally situated in wind exposed regions because then only all the pollen grains has to travel in the wind without any hurdles. So it reaches the stigma of a same species. Anemophily is a chance event because there are a lot of pollen grains and other spores available in the wind. So it is a chance that the pollen grain of a particular species reach the same species of another stigma. So it is a chances event. Some examples for wind pollinations, that is maize, sugarcane, coconut, grass, bamboo, palm. These are the example for wind pollinations. All these plants, the pollination carried out by wind. Next, the characteristic features of anemophilous plants, that is the pendulous catkin-like or spike inflorescence. It has here, see the pictures, it's a kind of spike inflorescence. Some plants have pendulous inflorescence like catkin-like spike-like inflorescence. Next, the elongated inflorescence axis to brought the flower above the leaves. So see the pictures. This is the elongated inflorescence axis, which brought out the inflorescence from the leaves. It's a very important character. You see, this is the elongated inflorescence axis, which brings the inflorescence or flowers above the leaves. Next, the perianth is absent or highly reduced. See, the perianth is not visible in this case. Next, the flowers are small, inconspicuous, colorless, not scented, do not secrete nectar because it doesn't need for the wind pollinating flowers. But in the case of wind pollinated flowers, it doesn't require such a characters. So the wind pollinated flowers need not to have color, not scented, so no need to secrete nectar. But the flower should be small in size. It is enough. If the stamens are numerous, filaments are long, excited, and versatile. The production of large number of pollen grains. So it is chances of events. Then only it requires an enormous amount of pollen. The pollen grains are minute, light, and dry. In some plants, anthers burst violently and release the pollen into the air. Example, Triticea. Large stigma, branched and feathery, adapted to catch the pollen grains, generally single ovule is present. Plants produces flowers before the new leaves appear, so the pollen can be carried out without hindrance of leaves. Pollination in maize, that is Zea maize. The maize is a common name. Zea maize is a botanical name. The maize is a monoecious and unisexual plant. Both male and female organs are present in the same plant, but unisexual. But each flower carries a one kind of gender, that is male, either male or female. The male inflorescence, called tassel, is borne on terminally, and the female inflorescence, called corp, lateral at the lower level. The maize pollen grains are large and heavy and cannot be carried by the light breeze. Here see the male inflorescence at the terminal position, that is called tassel. Here the female inflorescence, called corp, which is present in the lateral position in the lower leaves. This is the stigma of a female flower, which is 23 centimeter in length. So this stigma can ready to receive the pollens from the terminal male inflorescence. So it receives the pollen grains from this. It has a huge weight, so which doesn't carried out by long distance. So without that, it has to reach the same flower. Next, hydrophily. Hydrophily, that is the pollination by wind. The flower pollinated by water, said to be hydrophilous. For example, Alisneria hydrilla. The floral envelope of hydrophilous plants are reduced or absent. There are two types of hydrophily. That is, one is epihydrophily, another one is hypohydrophily. So in the case of epihydrophily, most of the floral pods along the water level, whereas in the hypohydrophily, the floral pods are in the submerged water. In most of the hydrophilous flowers, the pollen grains possesses mucilage covering, which protects them the wetting. You see the box, that is in water plants like Eichhornia and water lily, pollination takes place through wind or by insects. Even though these plants are growing in a water, but the pollination is carried out by wind and insects. Let us see epihydrophily. The pollination occurs at the water level. For example, Vallisneria spiralis and Elodia. These two plants are pollination carried out by water. So along the water level, you see this the male flower which is produced in the male plant, female flower which is produced in the female plant. So both are dioecious plants because pollination and Vallisneria spiralis is a distinct type. It is a dioecious submerged rooted hydrophytes. So submerged means it allowed below the water level, and the female plant bears solitary flower which raise to the surface of water level using a long coiled stalk. The time of pollination, at the time of pollination, here the female flower, a small cup-shaped depression is formed around the female flower on the surface of the water. Then the male plant produces male flowers which get detached and float on the surface of the water. Then as soon as a male flower comes in closer to female flower, it gets settled in the depression and contacts with the stigma, thus bringing out pollination. Later, the stalk of the female flower coils and bring back the flower again into the just below the water level. It reaches the leaf clusters. So the flower from surface to under the water where fruits are produced. Next, hypohydrophily. The pollination occurs inside the water. Here, few examples are there. That is Zastra marina, Zeratophyllum. You can see the Zeratophyllum, which is completely submerged hydrophytes. So all the pollination is carried out by under the water. The zoophily, the pollination by the agency of animals is called zoophily, and flowers are said to be zoophilous flower or zoophilous. Next, animals that bring about pollination may be birds, bats, snails, and insects. Of these, insects are well adapted to bring pollination. Large animals like primates, lemur, or arboreal rodents, reptiles, lizards, garden lizards have also been reported as pollinators. The pollination basically divided into two types, that is the self-pollination and the cross-pollination. Based on the pollens were reached. The self-pollination are called autogamy. The cross-pollination otherwise called xenogamy or oligamy. The cross-pollination are of two types, that is abiotic agents and biotic agents. That is based on the agents pollinated the flowers. The anemophily plants pollination wind. Hydrophily pollination by water. The biotic agents, that is the zoophily, have been variously classified based on the animals which carried out the pollinations. So first, canthrophily, that is the pollination carried out by beetle, that what we call as canthrophily. Next, palinopily, it's a moth carried out by moth. Moth is a insect which looks like a butterfly, but it is not a butterfly. It's a kind that what we call as moth. Melitophily, that is bees, the pollination carried out by bees. Psychophily, the pollination carried out by butterflies. Malacophily, that is a snail. Malacophily, the pollination carried out by slugs and snails. Ornithophily, the pollination carried out by birds. Chiropterophily, that is the pollination is carried out by bats. And Myrmecophily, the pollination is carried out by ants. Next, we are moving on to the that is the ornithophily, pollination by birds. Ornithophilous flowers, that is Erythrina, Bambux, Zyzigium, Bignonia, Sterlicia, some other plants. Pollination is carried out by birds, that what we called as ornithophilous flowers or ornithophilous. The pollinators are hummingbirds, sunbirds, and a honey eater. You see this is one of the hummingbirds where it can be major pollinator in ornithophilous flowers. Next, we are going to see the characteristic features of ornithophilous flowers. The flowers are usually large in size. They are tubular, cup-shaped or urn-shaped. The flowers are brightly colored, red, scarlet, pink, orange, blue and yellow, which attracts the birds. The flowers are scentless and produce nectar, large quantities. Pollen nectar form the floral rewards for the birds visiting flowers. The floral parts are tough and leathery to withstand the powerful impact of the visitors. That is the Adansonia species. These Adansonia flowers pollinated by birds are called Chiropterophily. Pollination carried out by what? Bats. These examples Kigelia africana, Adansonia digitata. Some other plants are there. The Adansonia flowers pollination is carried out by bats. Next, the malacophily, pollination by slugs and snails. Some plants of Araceae are pollinated by snails. Water snails crawling among the lemna pollinated them. Next, you see snails and slugs. So there is a difference between snails and slugs. There is some difference between snail and slugs. So in the case of snail, it has a shell, but slug doesn't have shell. So this is the difference between both snail and slugs. Next, entomophily, pollination by insects. Pollination by ant is called myrmecophily. The insects that are well adapted to bring pollination are bees, moth, butterflies, and flies, wasp, beetle. These are the insects which is well adapted for the pollination. Of the insects, bees are the main flower visitors and dominant pollinators. So insects are chief pollinating agents and a majority of angiosperms are adapted for insect pollinations. So most of the angiosperms are well adapted for the pollination by insects. It is the most common type of pollination, which is entomophily is the most common type of pollinations. Next, the characteristic features of entomophilous flowers. The flowers are generally large, or if small, they are aggregated in dense inflorescence, for example, Asteraceae. The flowers are brightly colored. The adjacent parts of the flowers may also be brightly colored to attract the insects. For example, in Poinsettia and Bougainvillea, the bracts become colored. So when we talk about the entomophilous flowers, it has a very attractive nature. Then only the insects can visit. Flowers are scented and produce nectar. Most of the insects came to the flowers for its nectar. The flowers in which there is no in flowers in which there is no secretion of nectar, the pollen is either consumed as food. If there is no nectar, it can take the pollens from flowers, so used in building up of its hue by the honeybees. So pollen and nectar are floral rewards for the visitors. Next, the flowers pollinated by flies and beetles produce fall odor to attract the pollinators. In some flowers, juicy cells are present which pierced and the content are sucked by the insects. The pollination in salvia, that is liver mechanism. Here we can see the upper fertile lobe. There are two lobes in the flower. This is the upper lobe, upper fertile lobe, so lower sterile lobe. So when the bee or insects enter into the flower, the pollen gets dusted on the body of the insect. So the stigma that is present in the another flower, so it can be reached by the insects. The pollen get transferred to the stigma. You see one more picture. So a bee sucking nectar in the salvia flower. The structure of the lever mechanisms. It is a lever. The same phenomena occurs in the salvial flower. So it is act as a lever. The insects when it enters into the flower, so the pollen grains dusted on the back side of. So because of it is a protandrous nature, that is the anther is first matured, then the stigma is getting matured. So when the matured anther is there, when enter into the flower, the pollen dusted on the insects. Some of the other interesting pollination mechanism found in plants are trap mechanism, that is Aristolochia, fitball mechanism Arum, clip translator mechanism Asclepidaceae, piston mechanism the Papilloniaceae. Next, we will move on to the question practice. The first question: pollination characteristically occurs in option A, angiosperm and fungi, option B, gymnosperm and angiosperm, option C, pteridophytes and angiosperm, bryophytes and angiosperm. Yes, the answer is B, gymnosperm and angiosperms. The pollination characteristically occurs in gymnosperm and angiosperm because there is no pollen grains and stigma any other divisions like pteridophyte and bryophyte and fungi. Which one of the following features are present in wind pollinated plants? That is A. Pollen grains are minute, light and dry. B. The flowers are usually large in size, are tubular, cup-shaped, non-shaped. The flowers are brightly colored, red, scarlet, pink, orange, blue, and yellow, which attracts the birds. D option, all of the above. Yes, the answer is the pollen grains are minute, light, and dry. So the A is answer. The pollination by slug and snail is called. Yes. What is the answer? A is ornithophilus flowers, B is malacophilus, C is anemophilus, D is chiropterophilus. Answer is the B, malacophilus. Next, the fourth question: pollination by water is seen in A. Nelumbium, B. Vallisneria, C. Eichhornia, D. Nymphaea. As I told you, some plants, though it is occur in water or it may be hydrophytes, but the pollination is carried out by in different factors. So you guess the answer. What is that? Yes, B. Vallisneria. Pollination by water is seen in Vallisneria, though the Nelumbium and Eichhornia nymphaea are hydrophytes, but the pollination is carried out by insects. Next, fifth question. In which of the following pollination takes place by lever mechanism? A. Salvia, B. Ficus, C. Antirrhinum, D. Ocimum. The answer is A. The lever mechanism as seen in Salvia. The sixth question. In sausage tree, Kigelia africana, the pollination takes place by A. Birds, B. Bats, C. Wind, and D. Insects. The answer is yes, B. In Kigelia africana, the pollination takes place by bats. Thank you.